Hello everyone, thank you for attending my presentation. My name is Dorn van Dommelen and I'm a professor of geography at the University of Alaska Anchorage, where I teach in the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies. I teach in an interdisciplinary program called the Environment and Society program, which is a Bachelor of Science program that prepares students to work in a range of environmental fields, from environmental policy and law to actually being environmental field technicians. I'm going to be talking just a little bit today about how I use Avenza Pro to teach field methods in the GIS class and how I plan to extend my use of Avenza Pro and also other Avenza products in this particular course. The course itself is part of a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science, though it's called the Environment and Society program. It's an upper division course that's intended for all of our majors to take. For some of our majors, this will be the only GIS class that they have, but many of our majors also take GIS classes that are independently offered in the College of Engineering that can count towards our program. And so there's a blend of students. Some are very expert, some don't have very much experience at all. But all students have had at least a very basic level of GIS, and they've also had a field methods class as well, or at least they're supposed to. Students are supposed to follow a progression of courses, but as most of you probably know or remember, there are all sorts of ways around these official progressions. The course is sort of a stepping stone within our program. Students have generally taken a number of lower division courses, including environmental studies and science and their basic chemistry and maths and things like that. Now they are in the midst of preparing to take their upper division courses, and some students will end up taking a large number of GIS classes, but others might take just one or two more, or a course in something like conservation biology that requires a minimum amount of GIS. It depends on what their particular concentration is. All students in our major will eventually end up taking our capstone course in environmental policy and regulations in Alaska, and they will definitely be using in that class not only GIS, but they'll also be using Avenza Pro, because I actually teach that class as well, and I've been integrating it into the course. Now, environmental applications in GIS is this sort of basic GIS class. Students get basic vector and raster analysis. They also get a little bit of geovisualization and cartography skills, but it's all applied for an environmental field. So they have the opportunity, if they've only taken courses in the College of Engineering before, to really get a chance to use environmental data, analyze it, make sense of it, and map it as well. In addition, one thing they get in this course that they don't get in any other course in the university is field data collection. And this is always in the very first part of the course, and so even students with a lot of GIS experience have generally not done very much of this unless they've done something like an internship or had a summer job where they had the opportunity to do that. This is, of course, where I use Avenza Pro. I use it as an alternative to the standard GIS software that is out there. And I do that for a couple of reasons. One, so that everyone gets a chance to see that there are different kinds of software out there, but also because I find Avenza Pro to be really easy to use, quite intuitive for students, especially if they've never had a GIS class before, and it doesn't require a lot of database knowledge that some of the other software does. And I've been having really good success with it. I've used it now for 2 years, and I've taught 3 different classes using Avenza Pro and have plans to continue to do so. So the way that they use Avenza Pro is in a field data project that they are required to complete. Now, this is a follow-up to the environmental field methods class, which they have hopefully taken in the semester previous to when they take the GIS class. Of course, it doesn't always work that way, but it's supposed to. In this course, taught by a colleague of mine, students are required, among other things, to do a bunch of outdoor field sampling They do a plot-based sampling, they do a transect-based sampling, and they do point count sampling as well. And they produce reports on all of these things. So what I have my students do in the GIS class is to operationalize one of these sampling projects that they did. They get to choose the one that they're most comfortable with and that they enjoyed the most, and operationalize it in Avenza Pro. So they are going to first get a map of the area that they're going to collect data, and I help them a bit with that. And then they actually are going to create a form that allows them to collect all the attribute data that they need. And then ultimately, they also collect geolocated data and then download that and visualize it too. So they get to see the links very clearly between field methods and what they learned in field methods and GIS, so that they can start to understand how GIS really is functional and really incredibly important in their career path. The specific requirements of the project includes, first, every student has to develop their own form. And so their own form has to include a mix of different types of data. In fact, they're required to use all the basic forms, strong, Boolean, or string rather, I should say, Boolean, real, and integer data. They also need to collect data using at least one pick list. And then another thing that they have to have in the form is they have to record the accuracy of the GNSS unit that they're using. Now, pre-COVID-19, all the students used an EOS Aero 100 GNSS unit and got incredibly detailed and accurate data, usually with a resolution of less than 1 meter. It's been a little bit more difficult during COVID to have students use all of those, so many of them are using their phone or something like a Garmin GPS unit. But in the ideal situation, and what we'll be going back to next year, we'll be using the GNSS as opposed to a simple GPS unit. Once they have developed their form, then they go out and they collect the data. They don't have to collect as much data as they do for their field data assignment, but they do have to get enough data so that they can really understand what the problems are, especially with accuracy and with managing the data as well. After they've collected their data successfully, then they begin to download it. They download it either as a KML, and they also download it as a CSV. So those two things are required. Shapefiles come later in the course, and some students do make the bridge between their field data project and a later one where they may use a shapefile, but they don't have to do that in this particular project because we haven't gotten in the course yet to talking about vector data in a very detailed way. The deliverables that the students produce include a screenshot, and I'll show you an example of this with all the map metadata. Also, a screenshot that shows their form in action, which means, their string, Boolean, integer data that they have collected, so I can see that they're using it and how they're using it, how they've built the form, and then both a KML and a CSV file so I can see how everything is working. They then give a detailed written account of how they developed it, what the results were, what lessons they've learned, the degree to which they can see this as being useful in understanding and processing field data, those sorts of questions. So here, the outcomes that they're supposed to have, and this is very important, what do I want them to learn from this project? Well, first I want them to get used to evaluating metadata, and so that's why they have to collect the metadata. We've talked in this course, by the time they complete the project, about things like coordinate systems and projections, so I want them to be familiar with that, to understand what they're looking at. They also have to use the GNSS. Again, I've talked about GPS and other systems already. It's important for them to, be familiar using something more than just a GPS on their phone. They will also have constructed and used attribute data, which will be very important for later in the course when we start really focusing on vector data. And then they will also be familiar with the idea of all the different ways that we can export data that has been geolocated and use it in different ways, and then describe those different data forms. I then want them to use the geographic data to visualize the field data on Google Earth, and also, of course, just to understand how it's produced using CSVs and how that can be viewed on basic spreadsheet software. So here are some examples, and I just have a couple of shots here from one student. This shows the metadata being collected, and then just a little snippet of the discussion that she made of the metadata here. This is a screenshot of her attributes and of the forms that she created. Again, it's here so I can evaluate it, but it's also being done and in the report so that students can really reflect on what worked and what didn't, and begin to really understand how all those attribute data are collected. And then here is a screenshot that shows how at least some of the data looked on Google Earth, as well as a screenshot from the CSV file below. Now, students complete this project, but hopefully they're not done, and I'm working very hard right now on extending how Avenza Pro will be used. During the summer, all of our students are required to take internships at some point in their career. And so I'm trying to encourage students to use Avenza Pro in their internship when they are out collecting data in the field, which a large percentage of our students end up in Alaska doing field data collection. It's also starting to be used in different types of directed studies courses and also in other courses related to our program. And by way of an example of this, I have one student who extended work with Avenza Pro to a number of different classes as he produced this big report on the problems of European bird cherry, an invasive species in Alaska and in Anchorage in particular that is spreading all over waterways. And this included an upper division GIS class on spatial data management where he used Avenza Pro to collect data that he then eventually used in the construction of a database. So here are just a couple of examples of this student's work. This is the report that he produced, just part of the report that he produced, as well as one of the maps that he produced for some of the transects that he completed. Now, he completed transects in 3 different geographical locations and then ultimately made maps of those, all of which were included in the report. So in conclusion, I find Avenza Pro to be really useful for introducing students to mobile data collection, which is something they don't get in a normal GIS class, but then they get to really understand how it can be used seamlessly in a GIS environment. And I like to use it again because it's simple, it's intuitive. You don't have to have a lot of expert knowledge to create it and to collect data. And then once you are using it, you know, the data is super easy to download and use, and then ultimately import into a GIS system as well. Students can very quickly build forms, they can collect data, and then they can use those data easily. I've also found, this is sort of, I guess, ancillary, but it's really easy for me to build maps for them if they want to collect data in some part of the city or a surrounding area that there aren't a lot of good maps for. I can very easily create one for them, and then they can very easily put it on their phone in Avenza app, and then go out and collect their data. So I want to continue my work with Avenza Pro and plan to continue to use it in this course. But my current plan for extension of using Avenza Pro and Avenza products generally in this course is to change up some of the assignments that we're doing right now and actually have students collect data in local parks. Anchorage has a really extensive system of local parks, including one of the best cross-country ski trail systems in the United States. I want to get students not only collecting data on Avenza Pro, but then also making basic trail maps of parks using Map Publisher. And my hope is that next year I'm going to be able to nurture some relationships that I have with organizations like the Alaska Parks Foundation, some elementary schools, an organization called the Anchorage Waterways Council that does things like stream cleanup. And I'm going to get students building maps using data they collected on Avenza Pro on Map Publisher, so that those maps can then be uploaded to the Avenza Map stores, and then volunteers or people wanting to explore local trails will be able to easily use this on Avenza Maps. And I've actually created just a couple of my own maps using Map Publisher for the Map Store. I'm pretty certain that we'll be able to get students up to speed to be able to do this. It's been very fun exploring the use of Map Publisher, and I hope to be able to link some of the cartographic elements of what I do in class more fully to Avenza products. So thanks all for listening, and if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to send me an email. I'm happy to answer them and hope to learn a lot from you during this user day as well. Thanks again.